call this Lincoln Public Schools Board of Education special meeting work session to order. Ashley, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Byer,
Ms. Byer is excused this evening.
Mr. Boswell,
Present.
Mrs. Danick. Here. Mrs. Duncan,
Here.
Mr. Mayhew,
Present.
Ms. Baumgard. Here. Mr. Schulte.
Present.
And in the back of the room, the Open Meetings Act is posted. Last evening, we received a wonderful, detailed presentation from Nate. Thank you very much. And this afternoon, thank you again. You opened it up for our board, and I think many of us had the opportunity to meet with them. We have asked many questions. Now, I'd just like to open it up for more questions if we have any. Board members, do you have any questions? Lanny, you are first.
Yes, and thanks again for meeting with us this afternoon. One of the things that we discussed that I was hoping we could clarify publicly was yesterday someone made a mention of a 90% parent response rate on the online survey. I was wondering if that's actually not accurate. Could you clarify what the response rate was for
Sure.
parents?
Yeah, I think there was a figure in the report that was somewhat misinterpreted. We had 628 parents of students with special needs respond to the parent survey, which is very typical of what we see in other districts and happen to be particularly well distributed amongst age range, grade levels, and disabilities. But that 628 does not represent 90% of all parents. The figure that somebody had mentioned was of the 628 people who responded, virtually 90% of them were parents of students with disabilities, and the other 10% were not their parents, but may have been grandparents or guardians or some other role.
All right, but a 10% rate, well, 90% rate would just be off the charts.
I've never seen anything.
Never seen it. And 10% is, for this type of survey, a very good response rate.
Very typical.
Okay. That's my only question at this point.
Okay, wonderful. Anyone else?
I'll let you go.
Go ahead.
No, mine's a little more intense.
Okay.
Okay, Matt.
I noticed we've got special ed programs, voice, and preschool, and I just noticed that in the report, I didn't see any mention of those. I just wondered, first of all, if those were reviewed as a part of the special ed audit, or if that was, for whatever reason, outside the scope of what we asked you to do.
Sure. No, they were definitely, and many other programs were part of the review. Our goal, and we shared this when we started this work, was to look very broadly. So we looked across many, virtually all aspects of how you're currently serving students with special needs and other struggling students. And because we looked at everything, didn't mean we're going to report back to you on everything. One of our core philosophical beliefs is that a short list is better than a long list. Every system, every department, every program, probably every classroom could always get better. One of the ways we're trying to bring value was to bring focus to the district. So even though we looked at many things, we then sorted through all of those and asked the question, what very small number of things fit with your culture and climate and would have the greatest impact on students? And the 6 things we shared, and quite honestly, we actually usually shoot for 5, so you can fault us for giving you 6. But we wanted to give you the opportunities that were the most likely to be impactful. That does not suggest that there isn't anything else anywhere else in the district that couldn't be a little better or that we didn't look at. But the things you mentioned didn't rise to the level of this is the high leverage change area for the district.
So if someone were to contact us and say they have a significant issue with a voice program or a preschool program, we shouldn't interpret this by saying there's nothing we should change in it. We just should interpret it as these are the other areas where we're most likely to get the biggest result change or something along that line.
Exactly.
Okay.
The fact that they didn't make the list of opportunities does not mean they're perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for clarifying
Sure.
on that.
Good. Kathy?
Okay, so yesterday, everybody was feeling pretty good about the report. We all think that there's always room for improvement. That's part of being lifelong learners. That's one of our missions as a district. But I went home last night thinking, now what? Where do we move next? How do we proceed with this tremendous amount of information that all of us have kind of digested? And I don't know if it's giving us indigestion, but we're all digesting it. From my perspective, I kind of want to know, what are the things we can do immediately? What would be revenue neutral? What would be the things, how would we go about prioritizing what can be done? Where do we start?
Sure. So I think the question of where do you start and how do you move quickly are important and interconnected. So as I mentioned yesterday, there is nothing simple on this list. I wish there was. But if there was, districts like you all would have already done it. The second thing that I want to reiterate is, as a superintendent or a board, you can't do this work. This is, as you've mentioned, the reason for the indigestion is this touches an awful lot of people, parents, students, teachers, schools, central office, school relationships. So this is going to take a collective effort. There is simply no person or team or department that actually has the span of control. If you want to make sure, and I'm just going to give you one quick example. Struggling readers get 30 minutes a day of extra intervention from a highly skilled teacher of reading. Well, principals are going to be hiring people. Principals are going to be building schedules. Central office may have to do some training in PD. The data assessments you're going to use to identify these kids are going to come probably systemically rather than at the building level, and on and on. The IEPs need to be written to reflect these kind of service. So a lot of people have to come together to make this work. So the first thing it says, or suggests, doesn't say anything, it suggests that you got to get a lot of people to understand and simply process what we've shared. There's a lot here. Your teachers aren't even back yet. They haven't processed it. So I think there is a sharing out process before you can, and I totally appreciate the desire to get going. I'm much more a person of action than talk, actually. But you need to get a lot of people understanding and comfortable. And then we generally suggest creating some kind of cross-departmental team to work on this, because it's not special ed who's going to lead this, it's not general ed, it's not the central office, and it's not the schools, it's all of them. And so you got to think about what kind of organizational structure you're going to put in place to help lead this work, because it's going to be cross-departmental. Then I do think you need to prioritize. I don't think you can do all 6 things first, but I think some are very interconnected, so I think you can't do some without the others, but you need to make that decision. And then you got to put together the plan. And then the question is, once you've gotten the people on board and you've gotten a cross-departmental group that can really see all the interconnections and you've set your priorities. So those are really kind of the first 3 steps. Then you're going to build a very detailed action plan and see what comes first, what comes second. But I do worry, not about you all specifically, but in general, that a rush to start doing before you have a large group of people who understand and want to do and are part of the planning is you will start quicker, but actually finish and impact kids much later.
From my perspective, I agree with you 100%, but from my perspective, what I would see is we need a really big bus, and we need to put all the people on the bus. And then we need to start the trip, and it's a long road trip.
Yep.
And as I've gone through this, the number one thing I can see is communication and collaboration. And when I say what's revenue neutral, those two things are revenue neutral. That, they might not be the big picture items that someone sees as we can get through. Obviously, I believe that the board does play a role in making sure that things get followed through and get them done, but for very different reasons. As we look at it, we're the connection with the community. Our phones are the ones that ring first. I'm sure teachers get it, I'm sure staff gets it, but they expect their board member to do something. And so when a parent calls me, I like that I can tell them there is an effort going on, and the first thing we have to do is communicate, and the second thing we have to do is plan. And it's just like building a house. You don't go in and you don't put the living room in the house if you haven't built a roof on it. And so I think that we need to have that thought process between the 7 of us, that we understand this is systemic long-term, and that we're going to be working hard on this probably for the next couple of years. Thank you.
Don?
I had several comments. First of all, somebody who said the 90% response rate in that thing was me, and that was on my to-do list to get that clarified tonight as well. So thanks for taking care of that, Laney. One of the observations that I had is that, with all of the things that we're looking at, it looks like the direction that we're headed, and I know we're going to get to the next steps later, but it looks like where we're headed, we're talking about some pretty major sea changes in how we deliver services, and maybe even how we think about delivering services. And I think, from my perspective, I see this as very exciting because it looks like opportunity. I could see, though, from the staff perspective, maybe from the parent perspective, that there could also be some nervousness, because anytime you look at changing things, even if it's for the positive, there can be that fear of, what about my life is going to change? What am I going to lose? Am I going to like what's different? And I think what I would like for staff and for parents to know is that, again, this isn't about playing gotcha with anything that we've already done. This isn't about assigning blame or anything like that. This is about getting better. And I think that this is a very very healthy conversation for us to be having. I think it's a healthy process for us to be going through, and it's something that the community has asked for. When several years ago, when we were working on our strategic plan, one of those main priorities that came from the community is our graduation rate and student achievement. And as has been said many times, the easy fruit has been picked. We have to dig deeper. We have to work harder. And this is exactly the kind of process that we need to go through to make sure that our kids are getting graduated on time and getting the services that they need. So. All of that to say that, again, I think this is a very positive process. I think that the intention is going to be for us to move forward deliberately, but in a positive fashion and an empowering fashion, giving staff the resources and the supports they need to be able to provide the services that parents and families need. So hopefully that would provide a little comfort to the people who are going to be involved in the changes that are coming in the next few years. One of the questions that I had for you before, Nate, and I'd like to ask you again, is about the concept of least restrictive environment. And I think that the answer is very similar to the one that you had from Matt, where the recommendations in the report are the things where you would perceive we could get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. That doesn't mean that other things aren't important, or maybe there are other things that we're doing fairly well. In conversations that I've had over the years with teachers about least restrictive environment, I don't think anyone would argue against the concept, but I think some may suggest that the way we define least restrictive environment needs a little work or a little definition. And I noticed that that wasn't something that came up in the report, and I wonder if you could respond to that a little bit.
So to be really clear, at least for serving students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment, not only is it the law, it's a really good thing for kids. It is a best practice. Not everything that gets passed as a law is a best practice. This is a best practice. This is great socially and emotionally. It's also great academically. What you will see in our report, and again, it doesn't necessarily use the phrase least restrictive environment, because that can sometimes have a very particular meaning, a very legalistic meaning of, as a student, what room am I in during the day? And, what we found, and as you said, Don, we did look at that, and the vast majority of your kids are in, quote, the right room, they're in the least restrictive room. We've been in many districts where kids with, mild to moderate disabilities who absolutely should be spending the vast majority of their time in general education weren't. And in those kind of districts, that'd be the first or second opportunity mentioned. So we didn't see that there is a wholesale lack of least restrictive environment going on. So let me point out what might be a little hidden in these opportunities is almost all the opportunities are designed to both expand and strengthen servicing students in the least restrictive environment and to help your teachers be more comfortable and proficient at doing that. So for example, the extra time to learn means that a student who is in the least restrictive environment does and will have access to core instruction, but also have access to the additional supports they need without having to give up on the least restrictive environment. And our recommendation or opportunity around strengthening and expanding support for students' behavior challenges, particularly what we referred to as Tier 2 and Tier 3, the more severe behaviors, but not so severe that they should go to a more restrictive school, by investing in serving and meeting those behavior needs. Those students will have and get to keep the opportunity to be educated in the least restrictive environment. And at the same time, some staff who might feel that you may have pushed the line a little too far may not feel that anymore, because what your staff and principals are telling you, and if you look at the responses in the area of behavior, there is a group of kids who they don't feel like they have the resources to meet their needs and meet the needs of all the other kids in the school. And that might be a part of the reason you hear, some of those questions about where the line is drawn. But our sense is that it's the right thing for kids, it's the right thing by the law, and these opportunities will help make it easier and more often that kids will have least restrictive education.
Thank you. A couple of other things that stood out for me as we were having our conversations and going through this. These aren't necessarily questions, but just observations. One of the things that stood out with me is the observation that we are well-funded, that we are well-resourced. And that's particularly interesting to me because there are times that it is a question of resources, that in terms of people or money or whatever. And there are people who would suggest you can't always throw money at a problem to solve it. And I think that this is one of those cases where that observation is correct. And I think that it's particularly exciting to me because it's one thing if we have a need and we need to go talk to the legislature or we need to talk to the federal government and lobby them for the resources to support the work we're doing. It's another thing entirely to recognize that we have the resources to do what we need, but there are ways that we could be smarter about it, because that is something that is completely within our control to fix. And so that's something that I find particularly exciting. But also the idea that as a high-performing district, we would be looking for these kinds of opportunities. And the answer isn't always that we need more money. Sometimes the answer is we just need to do something differently. And I think that this is a demonstration that we're open to that and looking for those things. This is, I think, a thing in a long list of demonstrating that, but this is another example of that. Us looking for opportunities to do more with what we already have. So I think that's very positive. Last thing, again, is just as a recap, it's clear to me that we have a lot of work in front of us, but again, I see this as a huge opportunity for us to move the district forward, and so I'm looking forward to the work that we're going to be doing on this for the next couple of years.
Annie?
It's very funny that you said we should get on the bus because I actually see this report as a way of us getting off the short bus and kind of losing that or redefining that concept of a short bus mentality and having our kids understand what that mentality is too, because that is a reality in their lives of if you're the special ed kid and being pulled out of classrooms, there's all kinds of ways in which our kids are labeled consciously or unconsciously by what we're doing. And when I first read this report, that was my first thought. It's like, finally, we have an ability to get our kids off the short bus. We don't need to have that kind of culture and thinking. So I really like that. But that the other thing I was re-looking, and I wrote down a couple of your quotes yesterday, and one that kept coming back to me is you said, if we do this poorly, we will be doomed for a decade. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, let's just sit here for a while then, shall we? So then I was wondering, you also mentioned that there were minds, some general minds that we have to be aware of. So I'm wondering, without, getting the full practice going forward, what would be things like maybe your top 3 when you're thinking about this? These are the things you really need to be aware of that could be the thing that could doom you for a decade. And did you know that you spoke so darkly?
I would. The sentences flow, they're not planned, so I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it's simply true. So you never actually get the same thing twice from me. But I stand by it. It is an accurate statement, even if a bit dark. And what I mean by that is these are vulnerable children who you are working so hard for and want to work harder yet for. The reason we're all here today is that we feel like we're not doing well enough by them. So, and so the reason you don't get, another expression is it's not 3 strikes and you're out, it's 1, is that parents and staff and principals rightfully don't want to step backwards. These kids you can't take them backwards as you're trying to move forward. So that's why a comment like that. So what are the 2 or 3 things that can make that happen? So one is trying to move forward before enough people, particularly school-based staff, particularly principals, are genuinely and fervently behind it. Because there are going to be 100 small decisions you need to make as you roll this out. And if they're doing it because you told them to, or they don't really understand the essence of it, they will unintentionally make some of the wrong decisions. And then you're not going to get the benefits. And people say, see, we shouldn't have tried. Like, what we had wasn't great, but this seems maybe not even as good. So having people really understand the goal. I'll give you an example of doom-like rollout. District said, we're going to ensure all kids who need extra help in reading will get 30 minutes a day. And that message went out, and they said, we're going to have reading teachers to do this. Now you notice, everything I said last night was highly skilled and well-trained reading teachers. Well, how that got interpreted 9 months into this by principals who were not nearly as engaged in the process as they needed to be is, we need to hire some reading teachers, and this is really important from the board's perspective, so we're going to get going on it. Well, it happened to be July. They had 8 weeks to hire reading teachers. Reading teachers, the really good ones, usually get hired in December. And the people they were hiring really weren't reading teachers either. And they, even though it was a plan to bring in these really top quality people, they brought in people who are having trouble getting jobs elsewhere. You roll it out on the first day and the classroom teachers say, I don't want my son or my students going into that reading room. They're not that skilled, they're not very well trained, I don't know why we hired them. And literally on the first day, people are feeling like, we didn't really do what we set out to do. And so I think the fact is, and I'll get specific, we have historically relied in K-12 on certification as a critical determiner in the hiring process. And almost everything we've talked about is skill, training, background, and ability. And so you can go through a hiring process to staff and assign people to this work that may or may not have those skills. and you just need to make sure that they do. So that is probably the most common, if the most common pitfall is not enough buy-in before you get going. The second most common pitfall is relying too much on certification as a measure of their ability, because it is their ability that mattered more than their certification.
Someday you're going to have to tell us how you figure out the difference of how do you find out the ability then? I mean, that takes time and effort also.
It does.
My other question is more of a larger, the achievement gap that you told us about, the national norm, I find really, really very bothersome. If we put in all this effort, is this effort really towards changing that achievement gap?
Yeah, there are districts, when you do this well, the achievement gap can close dramatically. It really is, we're not talking about, again, you do it really, really well, we're not talking about a point or two closing, but, setting a goal to cut the achievement gap in half is not unrealistic. This process, these practices substantially moves the needle when done well over time.
Thank you.
Lanny?
I'm also going to quote you, because there was a couple of things that you said yesterday that really resonated with me. And one was that as we look for these opportunities to improve, that if this were my child, I would insist on it. For the last 11 years, this has been my child. My daughter was identified as a student with special needs in preschool age, and she's been receiving services for 11 years. And our family's experience with that has just been incredibly positive. It's been life-changing for her. And so this is something that I would insist on for all students that need it. The other thing that you said that resonated with me was that we have many things going well. There's much to be proud of, but there's much work to be done. And I think that is really a characteristic of a highly performing school district, that we focus in on continuous improvement. And saying that we need to change something or implement something doesn't mean that something is bad. It just means that we have an opportunity to improve, and we have an opportunity as our students' needs change and as best practices change, as we learn more about how students learn, we're always going to be improving. And I think as a district, as long as we continue to do that, we'll continue to excel. And importantly, as we do that work, we need to do it together. And so we will need to work with stakeholders. We'll need to reach out to our community, to our teachers, to our parents, to know that this report isn't about a board voting tonight to start implementing changes. It's about starting a discussion. And this is great material to fuel that discussion. We all bring our own perspectives and our own stories, and that will be part of the discussion as we decide what we can do as we move forward. But it'll always be based on our belief as a board that all students can learn, and our understanding that we'll be building on the great work that our teachers and SPED staff are doing today. So thanks again for all of your work.
Yeah, as I read this and just reflect on this today, thanks for meeting with us, by the way, again. We went into this assuming there might be some changes we need to make. And I think the exciting thing about this is you've helped shine some light in some areas that we really need to make some changes over the next few years. Some very calculated and appropriate changes. It's interesting to me to look at this and see there's some types of roles in our district that we would assume are primarily working directly with students, that instead are losing a lot of time to administration. And some of those changes are going to be really good and positive for our students. So thanks for shining that light in some of those areas that we can identify and make the changes we need to better serve kids in Lincoln.
Happy we could help.
Anyone else? Very good. Well, I'm just going to wrap it up just with a few more comments. Many of you in the audience know that I was a special ed teacher for 17 years. So I'm laughing at Mindy because many a lunch hour we sat and we talked about our students. So when you become a special ed teacher, you are one forever, and it stays with you forever. And you think about those kids night and day, and you're all nodding and nodding. And I just want you to understand, as a board, we're behind you on all of this. And I know that you're all worried that we're not, but we are. And so I don't want to get emotional, because I am a special ed teacher at heart, but we are behind you. And the audit didn't mean that we were not behind you, because we are. And so we want you to understand that. So now I'd like to ask Steve, what are our next steps?
So if I could just back up a little bit and think about this in terms of where we are as a district in our evolution. 6 years ago, 5 years ago, we embarked on a strategic plan, something that Lincoln didn't have. Lincoln Public Schools didn't have one. Some would argue didn't need one because results were really quite good. But we also needed to know where we were and where we wanted to go. And that plan that we're going to be talking about in the regular meeting in terms of renewal yielded a lot of voices. And those voices in the community basically said, we want the best for all of our kids. But we have to be able to measure that. And the way to measure that is through student achievement, student progress, and ultimately student success depicted by graduation. And so we've spent the greater part of 5 years really immersing ourselves in how do we become a better school district. This community demands that. And the fortunate part for us is not only do they demand it, but they're also willing to roll their sleeves up and help support us in that. And that's a good position to be in as a school district. It's very difficult to make change when things are going well. In fact, many of the change authors, and it would be John Maxwell, it could be Jim Collins, it could be John Cotter, would say that unless you've got a crisis in front of you, it's very difficult to make change because people don't feel compelling need to do that. There isn't any aspect of Lincoln Public Schools that's broken. There isn't any compelling crisis. But we set a goal for 90% on-time graduation rate. And we've worked really hard to get to that. Now, whether we make it or not is to be seen. That's a very bold and a very difficult goal. And once we began, as Mr. Mayhew mentioned, started picking off that low-hanging fruit, it really became, how do we get to the kids that are struggling the most? How do we meet their needs? How do we help them become successful? And in a district like LPS and others around the country, although I think we're probably one of the better districts around the country, there are always gaps. And those gaps don't exist because they don't exist because we don't work hard. Those gaps exist because we're a growing district of 1,000 students a year. Our poverty rate continues to go up. We're a refugee resettlement community. We're a place where people move because there's special services here. In many, many ways, I could argue that we're being asked to do more and more and more, and resources don't keep up with that, as we all know. But when we began to think about how do we move the needle for all kids, it was incumbent upon us to really look at our big departments, big areas, big pieces. I don't know the percentage of student population that's special education, but let's say it's 15%. That's a big part of what we do. Everybody works hard, but as a board, as we begin to look at resource allocation every year, Kathy Danek and Don Mayhew and others have been on a finance committee, and we're looking at staffing. Special education is an area where we always felt like we couldn't meet the demand, that the needs were becoming greater and greater. So last year when we established this as a strategic priority, we went into it thinking, let's get some data, let's get some information with regard to how we are doing and what are those gaps. And as I began then as the person charged with the responsibility of doing the research and figuring out where do we go to a company or a group of consultants that have done this kind of work before. And as I mentioned last night, I don't think that they give districts what they want to hear. I think they give districts what they need to hear. And that's what this report represents. So I want to lend my voice to all of you and say that this is not an end. This is a beginning. This is a conversation starter. This is an opportunity for us to have courageous conversations. And one of the things that I'd like to do to get to Mrs. Duncan's question finally is to begin to have that conversation with our staff and with our leaders. We have wonderful, wonderful leaders in the special education area and the general education area. And as Nate pointed out a number of times, this is not just special education. This is the entire school district. It's wrapping our arms around those kids, our kids, that are struggling the most. And so what we need time to digest. We need time to reflect. I know Nate and his team have met with our leaders. We're going to follow that up with additional meetings. I'm going to be looking for some opinions to be expressed. Dr. Stavum and I will lead a lot of those conversations. And then as the board's going to take up in a few minutes when we adopt 2017, 2018, 2016, 2017 goals and onward, there's that priority that by February 1, 2017, if I recall correctly, you'd like to see some plans for some implementation. This isn't going to happen in 1 year. It isn't going to happen in 3 years, but what we're going to do is we're going to be systemic, we're going to be deliberate, and we're going to do what we can do to really change part of our culture so that more of our students can be successful. I know we have the team to do it. I know we have the staff to do it. But it's really time right now for us to have a common conversation. And this is not an attack on special education people. This is not an attack on general education people. It's what we set out to do when we received the strategic plan recommendations from that broad-based community group. Get all of our kids to the graduation platform. Let's not have any defects. And we've had a lot of success. We've had a lot of success. It's time now to really look at it student by student by student and determine what we need to do within existing resources to be able to meet those needs. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation with our teams and with our board. We have a student learning committee that should be the vehicle for these conversations as we begin to gather more information and go forward. And we'll bring you some recommendations on what that looks like. But this is not change for change's sake. This is not change because it's popular. This is change to really help us become a better organization than we are today. And we're coming at it, as Nate has said, from a position of strength. We're not coming at this with a mandate that we better fix something fast. And if we want change to take hold and truly be systemic, come at it with people that are highly professional and well-trained, and in a district where we've already got a success matrix that works extremely well. So that's what we'll do. We'll have internal conversations through the fall, and we'll be talking with our Student Learning Committee, we'll be talking with ourselves, we'll be talking with District Management Council, because one of the things that we'd like to do is create that set of benchmark measures that will tell us that we are making progress. Don't look for dramatic changes overnight. That's not going to be the case, but you'll be hearing about some things going forward that will be good. But I want our board and our community and our parents and our staff to know this. These changes that they are suggesting to us as opportunities are not easy changes. This is not first-order change. This is second-order change. This is fundamentally altering the manner in which we conduct business. And that is difficult to do, but we've proven as a school system that we can do that. And what carries the day for any second-order change is a goal. And that goal that we have to get to that 90% and above is really the driver for this. So I appreciate the fact that the Board of Education, we've talked about this for the last 3 or 4 years. We put a plan in place. We found a consulting group to come in. I feel very, very good about what this report represents, and it gives us, again, the opportunity to really begin an engaging conversation that'll lead to better results.
Well, Dr. Joel, we have full faith in you and your staff that you will accomplish this, so thank you very much. Anyone else? I do not have a request for closed session, so we are going to recess until our regular board meeting at 6 o'clock. That's it.